Hello and welcome to Sage Thyme. Lillian here with you today as I touch upon the pulse of the collective, as we also take an investigative look at the archetypes of current astrology this week, in addition to seeing what Spirit has to bring into the narrative, as always, for you to personally translate and assimilate in accordance to your divine design. So let's get started. This week in astrology, we have, the month of March is a powerful month, astrologically speaking. And of course, that can be said in many, many different times throughout the year. But this one in particular has some fantastic archetypal influences, tugs and pulls, overlays that I want to bring up, because even if you're not somebody that's into astrology or well-versed in it even, it is incredibly beneficial to know. There's a plane flying over right now. It is incredibly beneficial and supportive to have an idea of what archetypal influences are moving through the collective across the planet and in your personal daily lives. It helps a person get a baseline as to where they are in the progress of their personal development, as well as to have a loose expectation, I would say, an idea of what to anticipate potentially or expect. It allows a person to, if it's something that could be recognized as a repeating cycle, where there was in the past a reactive situation or one that resulted in a shock or something like that, it allows a person not necessarily to prevent it, although there is debate as to whether or not that can happen, but to allow a person to gather themselves in such a way that they can make the most of the circumstance. They can develop within themselves the most within what could say be a hostile or a traumatic or a intellectually challenging or emotionally pulling, or all the different things that the many archetypes can bring. And because we are humans living, or really spirits living a human life, we are in fact living a life. And so there are cycles and cycles within cycles and greater cycles beyond that. And having an awareness of those and the archetypes that are interplaying and how those archetypes often interact within each person's own individual life schematic really is an empowering thing. And so I wanted to add that little bit of, this is part of why I have such a strong passion about this. I have such a great enthusiasm when it comes to blending archetypes, because they can be applied to everything from astrology, any forms of divination, tarot cards, to biblical scripture reading, to scrying with the elementals. It can also be applied to how one moves through different stages of life, how one uses applications of hard science, medical science, physics, mechanical physics, so many things. Oh gosh, I mean, really, it could be applied in any way, whether you are somebody who rescues animals and helps them recover, or works hospice with the elderly, or is striving to become a chief executive in a large corporation, or starting your own small business of artists and crafts or baked goods. These archetypes, as well as how they can work with every type of method, modality, philosophy, spirituality, is again so empowering. So that's my little soapbox there for all of that. But I think it's nice to put it into context. If you hadn't pondered it before, it really opens that up for you. So, okay, let's talk about the transits that are going on right now. Really, it started more officially, or not officially, more intently an influence yesterday and will continue over the next 3 or 4 days. Today being Wednesday, March, I don't even know, forgive me, March 15th. There we go. So what we're looking at here in the astrology today is in the sign of Pisces, according to current astrology, we have the planets Neptune, Sun, and Mercury in a very tight stellium. Right now, Neptune is at 25 degrees, 6 minutes. The Sun is at 24 degrees and 59 minutes. And Mercury, so it's quickly a runner-up behind Pisces. And then Mercury is not too far behind at 23 degrees and 24 minutes. Now, those 3 planetary aspects, Neptune, the Sun, and Mercury, in the sign of Pisces are in a very tight square with Mars in Gemini. Mars is at 25 degrees and 27 minutes. So you can see Neptune is just a few minutes, about 20 minutes in terms of astrological degrees, from an exact square with Mars in Gemini. And then the Sun will be coming up just moments later to also perfect that square. And then Mercury will bring up the rear, I think in the next, I'm not going to pull up the days, but in the next 2 days, I would say, yeah. And their influence will span over not just these days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It'll continue on for a few days as well. So it's great to really have an idea of what the energetics are of the archetypes that you can work with and make them your own. Of course, this is only one narrative, and I like to look at narratives that are brought to me more through spirit. Of course, I look at the astrology of the archetypes in their traditional and ancient text formats, and then I like to see what spirit wants to supplement them as. So you'll hear a combination of those two always with me. So if you think about Pisces in its shadow, the sign of Pisces, which has Neptune, the Sun, and Mercury in it. So Pisces influence in its shadow is something more along the lines of, it is either this or it is that. It's black or it's white. It's right or it's wrong. And that can be in terms of any subject, war versus peace, marriage versus freedom. I don't know, or not freedom, that wouldn't be the right word, versus open relationships, structure versus chaos, law versus anarchy, or control, these types of different things. You can think of them in extreme polarities like those, but also allow yourself to apply those in some of the lesser, the things that work within your life on a more subtle scale, and things like topics that are really popular in Western society, success versus failure, and then putting those two up and kind of taking them apart. What does success mean to social culture, and what does it mean to me, versus what does failure mean in social culture, and what does failure mean to me? And then you'll start seeing them flip oftentimes, and you'll start seeing, oh, what society thinks culture, or what society thinks success is, actually for me might be the reflection, feels more like a failure. It's asking me to pull myself in a direction that isn't befitting what my soul calls me into, and what society calls a failure. Well, I actually see a great deal of freedom and success in that. Every time I fall, I find a way to pick myself back up. I learn, I dust myself off, and wow, why am I, attaching these flavors and meanings to these words when they're not just this or that, either or. They have a tendency to come together. And so that last bit there is a more evolved and ascended aspect of Pisces. creating a bridge between this or that, either or, right or wrong, and allowing not only the two to flip and change roles, but then allowing them to take on more depth and meaning. And so that it no longer becomes either or, the right way, the wrong way. It becomes a bigger way, a greater way, a more intricate way. And I know you've all heard me talk about that before. So that's Pisces, the sign of Pisces in its shadow. Gemini in its shadow has a bit of a, there's a lot of different ways to look, or not a lot, there's a few different ways to look at Gemini in its shadow, but I see it as Gemini will say in its shadow, what's that quote? 1, 2, 3, can't see me. It's that duck and hide, head in the sand. It's too much for me. I'm overwhelmed. Thunk. And down goes the head in the sand. But little does the bunny know that his tail is still sticking up straight at the sun. And everyone can see, right? Reminds me of the Watership Down. Ephrafa, I think is the name of the story, or the sign anyways. So, okay, that's Gemini in its shadow. Now, when we're talking about Pisces, and with the 3 planet stellium, that's, if we're looking at things in its shadow, and we think about Neptune in its shadow aspect, you'll see tendencies being magnified, pulls being triggered or activated for those who haven't worked through things that have an addictive quality, a dependency quality, a sublimation quality, not just addiction to substance, the workaholic, the distractionaholic, anything that pulls my consciousness out of itself, so I don't have to be present with what's going on the inside and what is yanking and tugging and screaming or crying for the me to listen to and pay attention to. So that's Pisces in its shadow. And looking at the sun in its shadow what I said before was Neptune in its shadow of Pisces. The sun in its shadow of Pisces is going to be that personality projected self. I know what I know, and I know it because I'm right, because I've lived it and I've done it. And you'll see a lot of fanaticism, philosophical, religious, spiritual, political, family dynamics, between friends, between coworkers. So we'll see that bit of personality self against the other personality, because there's a bit of a hubris and I know better than you know, without seeing a whole picture. And then Mercury in its shadow in Pisces is going to have a theme around supporting that righteousness, that hubris, both in speech and an inward reflection. So the Mercury really just magnifies the sun in its shadow aspect. Now, in terms of Mars in Gemini in its shadow aspect, it can be pretty simple. It can be, not simple, but it can be shades of passive aggressiveness, slander, or the idea of, I don't see any problem. That shutting down of seeing. Have you ever spoken with somebody or been in the presence with someone and you're trying to explain a situation that needs to be resolved? Somebody in a position of power, a parent or an employer or a headmaster, instructor, something like that, and a minister, and you're explaining a situation and the sides of it, and they simply glaze over or shut down, and I don't see an issue. So that would be something that you would see with Mars in Gemini in his shadow aspect. Now, I wanted to kind of get that out there so you can look at what could be pulling in different fields of those themes within yourself and observing them in others, and then also going into some ideas of the higher aspects of this, what we could really be not just looking forward to outside of us, but creating within ourselves, really truly creating these motifs within ourselves that create not only a new perpetuation of cycles, in advancement of our own selves and our personal experiences, but then also a perpetuation of resonance, how we represent ourselves through our actions, our non-actions, and really, so much more importantly, our presence. You know, we hear about these individuals throughout history. I was just watching a couple of nights ago the recording of the funeral processions for Thich Nhat Hanh, a wonderful man and human and spiritual self-developer, just in the Buddhist tradition. And his story is long and lovely, but to get to the point of this point, he had that ability to simply be. He would have these Dharma talks, and all of his students, the monks and the sisters and brothers of the monasteries, as well as people who would come in for lay people who would come in to learn more about their practices, would sit in his presence in silence, and they would simply glean the awareness and the resonance of his mission, which was truly the deepest, most potent, powerful levels of loving kindness and peace and joy. That was a big thing for him too. And joy, all those different things in ways that go so much deeper and more powerful and penetrating into the being. And because he dedicated his time and his life, his practice of life to those goals and that cause, he was able to reach potencies and depths within himself that exuded it simply by sitting in silence in the presence of others. And so that's a very Piscean thing, and very Neptune in Pisces, with then, of course, the support of the sun and Mercury, the sun being that projection. And Mercury, a lot of people think Mercury has to do with what we say. Really, it has a lot more to do with how we interpret and reflect and listen, assimilate. That's very mercurial. Mercury, yeah, I think that's the right use. So, Pisces, the sign in its conscious awareness, will say things like, I see many sides to this opposition. And yes, I even see the benefits and the wisdom to each side in this polarity. I see this in all of its phases, in between all of the different layers and all of the stages. So with Pisces being ruled by Neptune in modern astrology, and then Jupiter also co-ruling, as it did in ancient astrology, you can start seeing themes of Neptune, the great and wise mystic, the Gandalf, I'm trying to think now, I just totally forgot the other wizard's name, but many mystics throughout history have that presence, as I spoke of with Thich Nhat Hanh, that presence of being able to cultivate and harness a wisdom and an understanding through multiple phases and spectrums of perspective and opinion. And then you've got Jupiter, who is the transient, diplomat in a sense, the one who has been to both sides and spends even more time in between and looking at both sides and all the sides. If, you know, as often it is when the more we look into something, there's more than two sides within the two sides. Even within war and peace, there's more than two sides. It's more than war, it's more than peace. It's multi-layered and deep. And so that's Jupiter's influence here in its more conscious awareness state. So with the mystic and the high visionary diplomat, and by diplomat also I don't mean the one who says I'm neutral because I don't want to get involved. It's the one who says I can speak here to both sides because I have experience in both sides in many ways. Now you've got this mystic slash seer slash hierophant, the teacher. Hierophant also meaning the bridge. If you look at the sigil of Neptune, terrible drawing, it shows two sides with a bridge between the two. And that to me is a great representation of what we're talking about here with these planetary influences. And the Hierophant, the diplomat of wisdom, of great, powerful wisdom. And the kind that not only has wisdom from experience and can just come into a room like the UN and say, well, I know what it is to be France and Turkey and Russia and Peru, and so I know the solution. I'm not talking about that kind of wise hierophant diplomat. I'm speaking of the kind that can come in, hold presence of the truth that they know, and in addition, ask questions. Teach by asking questions. Pointed, discerning, and deliberate questions of each side. Knowing the exact question to ask one particular side in such a way that it leads them on a path of self-inquiry without triggering the resistance defensive mechanism, which we all have. That's what gets us in a position of polarities in the first place. And so the Hierophant, this wise mystic listener, is able to come in and say to the one side, what is it like for da 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 da? Or how does it work for you when this and this and this happened? And asking certain pointed questions that then leads this one side into, again, the self-discovery, but also into revealing in words in their response how they have been in the position of the side they are opposing. And all of a sudden they'll start to, because it's a path of self-inquiry and proclamation, they're able to start seeing bit by bit, oh, I am hearing now what the other side is saying better. I'm hearing where they're coming from because I've been there, but in a different way, and I didn't see that before. And that's what a truly wise teacher can do, is teach through inquiry and help guide, beam a flashlight in a way down a path that leads to personal epiphany and discovery. And there's more power in that, right? Don't you all learn so much more when you come upon it yourself versus someone telling you, you need to see it this way and look at it this way? There's an instant wall and block that comes up. And then it shuts down the layers of periphery that could be discovered that even the great wise mystic doesn't necessarily see or need to see, but knows that they're there. Okay, and then this is also the power of this square pulling on Mars and Gemini. If you remember from previous talks, I spoke about a square similar to the tension you feel from two latches being stuck. We can think of it like the Chinese finger traps we played with as kids. I like to look at it like a stuck drawer. And you can pull and pull and pull, and it's only going to get more stuck. But if you kind of feel into it and you, instead of pull, retract and let it go back in and slowly guide it. You can listen through feeling what tiny little nuances need to be shifted and moved, and then the drawer unsticks very, very easily. And that is what a square will require us to do, is take these archetype influences, and will feel a tension, a pull and a yank and a stuckness and an agitation, even like, you know, hitting the walk button at a sidewalk doesn't make, over and over again, doesn't make it go any faster. But pushing it one time, standing in breath and utilizing that opportunity to get present within the body brings in a number of wonderful gifts in that moment that wouldn't have been had otherwise if we were pushing and pushing and pushing on that walk button, sidewalk button. So that's the square. And with Mars being on the forward end of that square, in a sense, in Gemini, Mars, the planet of reactivity and action and get results with little to no reflection time, definitely no stillness time. But when you have Mars in a square with Neptune, the Sun, and Mercury, and you have a Mars that is more seasoned, has been around the block of his own reactivity and what the results were, and how well burning all bridges and blasting fires everywhere did not work for him. And so he's done this. He's been there, and he's feeling this pull with Neptune holding a space of, I'm not going to concede to old addictive distraction patterns. I'm going to hold and be still and tend to what is yanking and pulling, what emotional tugs and so forth are pulling. And Mars's ears perk up and say, well, if Neptune's doing that, okay, I might follow the lead on that. And the Sun, instead of working with Mercury, instead of being right and indignant and in hubris and loud and proud and everything, the Sun's going, you know what, I want to look at some of the shadow aspects that I cast as well as the light. And Mercury says, I want to reflect and see the importance of not just the mercurial nature, the easily shape-shifting nature, but also I want to see the value and importance of the shape holding itself and why that's needed at times too. And so Mars goes, all right, I'm not going to be outdone. And even though I'm in the sign of Gemini, fire and air makes more fire and a lot of smoke. I'm going to take a beat and take a breath, and I'm going to get still. Now, when Mars is being called into to get still, especially in an air sign, he starts feeling things that are neurological and fiery. Peripheral neuropathy can be a big thing. Anything that has to do with MS is another thing that has to do with heat, electricity, the cerebral central nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, the fight or flight mechanisms. When he starts getting those pulls and yanks, he's really being called to task of moment by moment. Oh, I feel that push and exertion, and I'm feeling myself tensing up in it. I'm going to go sit down. I'm going to sit and I'm going to breathe. And I know it's going to be uncomfortable, and I might even feel angry or agitated or more pain or more in my head, those kinds of things. But I know that if I sit with it and keep sitting with it, that latch is going to release, and then I'm going to be able to open. And that's Mars and Gemini being pulled on the square from the planets in Pisces. And when that happens, Mars becomes the new experience of himself. And he starts to say things like, okay, I'm listening. There is a different way. I don't know what it is, and I don't need to know. I need to listen to the ones that are in this room with me, Neptune, the sun, and and Mercury. And I'm gonna go ahead and let them give me some information and take my cues from them. And when that happens with Mars in Gemini, a vertical column, a vertical channel opens up. You know, I showed you the sign of Pisces, the sigil for Pisces. And then this is the sigil for Gemini, the twins. But I like to also, something that I've experienced with Gemini and its influences when different planets come in, is that the two horizontal bars, top and bottom, when Gemini starts becoming more seasoned and becoming more developed, those two channels represent to me the crown and the root chakras, and they open, they align and they open, which allows that vertical channeling from top to bottom, from the heavens to the depths of the earth, to really clear out. And with Mars being in that position in Gemini, now we're talking about Mars, the body, which also is something that Mars represents. And so a cleansing and a clearing can come through, as well as an incredible amount of clear, clean, and powerful downloads. That's the pow of Mars in his new advanced, well-seasoned stage of life, is he can open up to and receive physically in the genetic memory of his cells the downloads when he stops and he stills and he calms down and doesn't try to do. And so now we've got this combination. We have, I'm trying to remember how this kind of came in as the cards were flying out after I wrote everything. We have Neptune, the mystic, in Pisces, that is getting the support of Mars to open up that crown chakra. And then here we've got this beautiful third eye chakra, pineal, what does it say? Yeah, pineal perspective. So the cerebral and the mystic and the cosmic Akash, both vertically moving down and through, and then embedding itself within the cellular. Oh yeah, and look there, the genetic coding and new programming of the body. And because all the systems are a go, the body, the mind, the spirit, the stillness of the physiology and the neurology of the human being that is awake and aware and embodying these higher levels of archetypes, it's coming through very clean and clear and without a distortion, without kinks. And from that, we've got that solar and Mercury, well, really the solar, this is a beautiful depiction of that solar, the sun in Neptune, the water, I think that says the overflow. I'm reading it backwards in the camera. But look there, in her heart, she is receiving the information and moving it through the anterior aspect of her kundalini, or in Chinese tradition, the Ren Mai, the Ren channel. It's coming from the stars. It's coming from, also at the same time, the depths of her core. So it's not just a what's coming from outside of us is greater than what's within. It's the interconnectivity of the heavens, the gods, the God, the source, the universe that exists within the deepest, deeper and deeper still aspects of far deeper than our most minute particles of electrons and quarks and all the subspaces between us. Because as within, so without. And when that connection is made so deeply in that stillness within, it automatically connects us to the depths and the profundity of what is the heavens, right? The cosmos. And then all these archetypes, like these flowers, start to bloom in these beautiful, like unimaginable colorations and clarities and depth of beauty and possibility beyond what we had in our scopes before. And of course, there she's based in her heart, and she's reaching out horizontally with all those multiple arms, as well as her legs in the watery consciousness of the earth and the life on earth, and then the horizontal influences, which is the Mercury, then resonating and emulating that new downloaded imprint, the new blueprints of the codings that were opened up to. You can see there that horizontal wavelength coming from her clavicle, which is the connection between the heart chakra and the throat, and that's another bridge that's being opened up and expanded. Her third eye, which is in both a physical sense and a spiritual sense, it's the opening from the pineal gland, which lies in the back base of the skull. And it is a hologram to the star up above, which is representing the cosmic universe, source, all, God, the force, however you prefer to attach nomenclature to. And so that is really the message that's coming through, this incredible new knowing, codes, downloads, information, knowingness is coming in with the mystic of Neptune's ability to contain and embody that, because they have opened themselves up already in such a way. And then we've got the sun, who is able to say, okay, that's great, but we need to put this into form that is more perceptible and comprehensible than for the general population of not just humans but plants and critters, and really how the entirety of all ecosystems that make up our aka matrix, our reality, to put that, the sun says, let's put that into forms and words and thought patterns and energetic emoting emissions that are palatable to those around us, that can be perceived and worked with and advanced with within each person. And let's do that in a way that bumps up the paradigm of how we've been coexisting as a planet so far. Let's transcend the two polarities of all polarities, polarities within polarities and outside of polarities, and totally different ones altogether. Let's start transcending that. Let's give a little push to what is comfortable and start requiring that new life form to break outside of its shell. We had a little bit of pressure, which is Saturn actually moving into Pisces right now, bringing in some more pressurization. And let's transcend. Let's create a new paradigm in all kinds of paradigms. And let's do it clean and clear. And from a place of stillness and patience, let's create a new wholeness. What does whole mean? And when each and every person stops to say, I am whole, what does that start to become for them? And who do they become within that interpretation? And so this is why I was absolutely in love with this transit that we are just at the beginning of right now, and will continue to unfold even once the transit passes with upcoming ones. And so this is an influence that we will be working with in new and different ways, like turning the page to a new chapter of a book. You still have the story from before, but now it's a new adventure. And so I hope that this is something that really activated some wonderful blossoming for you today. And if so, I would love to hear your comments. Definitely, it's always a grateful gesture to see the likes and the comments. Subscribe, of course, if you haven't and you'd like to hear more content, and support this channel. I am always blessed to have your presence, always grateful. And I am just thrilled to be able to share all this with you. May you all have a wonderful rest of the week and upcoming spring equinox next week on the 21st over the 20th to the 22nd. And blessings to all of you. Take care now.